My name is nairn. I'm a freelance journalist. This is my third trip to Guatemala. I recently published an article on Guatemala in the New York Times, and this time we'll be doing a few short news articles and probably a longer magazine piece about Guatemala. And this is Jean Marie Simon, a photographer.
I'm a photographer, and I'm based in New York, and this is my third trip to Guatemala. The first time I was here on assignment for Geo magazine in 1980, and this past year I was here for Time magazine.
In March, a new government took power here in Guatemala, led by General Efrain Rios Montt. And the Rios Montt government has received a great deal of publicity around the world. And he claims to be reforming some of the corruption in Guatemalan politics and has adopted a new military strategy, which is more subtle than that of the previous government. And because of this change in power, the United States government is now considering giving military aid to Guatemala in the form of helicopters, which are very crucial to the guerrilla war going on here. So this is a very important time to be in Guatemala to assess the situation. And we recently discussed these matters in Washington with people who have been following the Guatemala issue for a number of years. Could you start by giving us your assessment of the current human rights situation in Guatemala and how it may have changed in recent months?
Well, I think the important factor is that there has been, over the last 6 months, evidence of significant improvement in the human rights situation in Guatemala. Since the coming into power of the Rios Montt government, the level of violence in the country, politically inspired violence, particularly in the urban areas, has declined rather dramatically. That being said, however, I think it's important also to note that the level of violence in the countryside continues at a level which is of concern to all. And while it is difficult, if not impossible, to attribute responsibility for that violence in each instance, it is clear that in the countryside, the government does indeed need to make further progress in terms of improving its control over government troops.
Bill, what's going on right now in Guatemala?
Well, we have reason to think that there have been thousands of people massacred since the government of President Rios Montt came to power in March of '82.
Do you know what the level of killings has been since the coup?
It's been sickening, disheartening, and phenomenal. It has not slackened any since he took over the government, and we're getting reports continuously coming in about massacres in all parts of the country.
About how many people have been killed since the coup?
We have information on over 2,000 people who have been killed, and we continue to receive reports from unionists, from church people, from refugees who've managed to get out of the country, from eyewitnesses to incidences in various villages. They're coming in all the time.
And who's responsible for most of the killings?
All the information that we've have to date is that that the security forces of Guatemala are responsible for the massacres.
Precisely what is the U.S. military presence or role in Guatemala at the moment?
We have no military presence or role. We have, as a part of our diplomatic establishment, a defense attaché office and a military representative. But that is the same sort of representation that we have in virtually all other countries in the world. We do not have American trainers working with the Guatemalan Army. We do not have American military personnel active in Guatemala in that sort of area.
There are no American trainers there?
No.
None performing the types of functions that go on in El Salvador?
No, there are not.
So do you think it's worth her going to Quiche?
I don't know, because I don't know how much time we're going to be able to spend up there, and whether we're going to be able to get anything that's worthwhile.
It might be interesting just to see how the Army is controlling the situation.
You think they're going to let us talk to the people who live in the town, though? Because you know the Army's going to give us one story, and the people who live in the town are just...
Even a controlled story from someone who has a lieutenant looking over his shoulder can be interesting to see how they tell it, to see what version they give. Guatemala is one of the most unequal countries in the world. There's a small oligarchy consisting of less than 1% of the population that is very wealthy. Many of them are millionaires from their exports of coffee and cotton and sugar. But the vast majority of the population is very, very poor. And a guerrilla movement has grown up here, which is now quite strong and is threatening to overthrow the government. And now it has reached the point where there's a very intense war going on between the army and the guerrillas, which seem to have popular support in a number of parts of the country, especially the northwest, Quiche, which is the area we're thinking about going to right now. You've been doing a health survey here in Nebach. What is the situation with the health and the nutrition level of people here?
Well, nutrition is a main problem here. Malnutrition, 80% of the population probably is malnourished to some extent.
80% malnutrition?
That's a rough estimate. I have no idea, but from what I've seen in the last 5 days.
Have some people been dying of hunger?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, a lot of people are dying of hunger.
Can you give some idea what?
And secondary effects of that? No, it's hard to pin that down.
But a good number of people.
Yeah, and effects of malnutrition. All the infectious diseases, measles kills here. Mm-hmm. TB is killing. TB is rampant. It's endemic here.
What is the level of tuberculosis?
I would say probably 60% of the population.
60%.
I don't know from what I've seen.
And how can people work when they're so malnourished and there's such a level of disease?
Because it's their lifestyle. They're used to living with disease and high infant mortality rate. Therefore, they have a lot of children. And to them, work is of most importance. It's their pride.
But physically, how can they do it?
It's the magnificence of the human endurance. You know, it's you'll see the people working. I mean, I see a man, you know, with a collapsed lung from TB. That's, you know, still carrying, you know, 40-pound ricks of wood, you know, 14 kilometers on his back. I mean, how can you do it? Well, I don't know. I couldn't do it by myself, you know.
En vista de la situación esta que se está presentando, mueva el personal de aquí, de Mono, con 3 patrullas, por lo menos de 80 hombres, y hace cerco sobre las poblaciones o sobre los objetivos 1, 2 y 3. Vamos a hacer un cerco alrededor, ya que usted tiene una patrulla en contacto y esta otra también. Vamos a pedir refuerzos de mirlo para que bajen. Y vamos a pedir refuerzos de zorro para que también haga un cerco y evitar que se enmontañen todos los heridos que tiene ahorita. ¿Cuántos tiene?
43.
Sí, en realidad lo que está haciendo la guerrilla es aplicando terror. Terror sobre las aldeas que han comprendido que están trabajando por una causa innoble, inhumana, y entonces se han pegado, han buscado la protección del ejército, y entonces la guerrilla se ha quedado sin abastecimiento en el lugar. Entonces tratan de aplicar terror para obligarlos a ayuda. Aquí tenemos 98, se está armando esa casa que está ahí para meter a 98 refugiados desplazados de esa aldea.
Y los culpables de esto y la mentalidad que les dieron fueron los curas. La mayoría de curas vinieron a mentir aquí. Y los señores de los catecistas y los no sé quiénes son los otros señores de la voz de Cristo, sí, de los de cooperativismo y un montón de cosas que vinieron a mentir aquí a la gente. Vinieron a reunir a la gente, pero con otra mentalidad. Cuando la gente se dio cuenta que eran mentiras, ya no los ayudaron, entonces la guerrilla tuvo que ir a la montaña. Y en la montaña no tienen que comer.
Los sacaron, que los repartieron. Unos para un cuarto, otros para otro, unos que iban para la gloria, otros que iban para el infierno. Los amarraron, los golpearon en diferentes partes del cuerpo, en